Peppa Pig's house always seemed like a safe place, warm and cozy. But no one suspected what dark secrets were hidden behind these familiar walls. Daddy Pig sat in his chair reading newspaper. Room temperature dropped suddenly. Something invisible watched from darkness. Black shadows slid across wall, taking creature's form. Ghost Labubu materialized in corner, golden crosses glowing ominously. Daddy felt cold wind and turned around. Ghost vanished, but presence feeling remained. Peppa and George played in nursery. Labubu observed family, studying each member carefully. At night, Ghost approached sleeping Daddy. His black paws reached toward man's head. Daddy woke from strange dream. His movements became slow and unnatural. Mummy noticed husband's odd behavior. He stared blankly and spoke with alien voice. Labubu seized control over Daddy's body. Ghost enjoyed new physical incarnation. Peppa ran to Daddy, but he didn't recognize her. Golden crosses flickered in eyes. Family gathered at table. Daddy sat silently, his soul trapped inside. Labubu influenced others through Daddy's body. House filled with dark energy. George cried, sensing something wrong. Mr. Dinosaur fell and broke. Mummy tried talking to husband. He smiled Labubu's terrifying smile. Ghost completely possessed Daddy's body. Real soul disappeared into darkness. Grandpa Pig visited and sensed trouble. Air became heavy and ominous. Labubu began changing house. No subscribe, nightmares arrive. An anonymous package stood on the nursery doorframe, a bright box. Peppa opened it. Inside there was no figurine. Instead, a bundle wrapped in sterile swaddling cloth lay there. A faint laughter emanated from it. Peppa unwrapped the cloth. It was a plush Labubu. Its eyes shimmered too wetly, too consciously. Peppa threw the toy aside, but moments later it was already lying in Evie's crib. By itself, the toy wouldn't let Evie go. The girl clutched it in her hands. The plush's eyes became alive. Deep, from its half-open mouth, a black substance oozed, thick, sticky. It dripped onto the swaddling cloth, soaking into the baby's skin. Mama Pig was delighted.
Look how much she likes it. How cute.
Her eyes glazed over. Pupils shrank into dots. She didn't see the black veins appearing on Evie's arms. She didn't hear the quiet whisper coming from the toy. The whisper sounded like the squeak of foam rubber. At night, Peppa heard sounds from the nursery. She entered. Evie was awake. Her eyes were wide open, filled with black liquid. The plush Labubu sat on her chest. Its tentacle-like arms had sunk into the baby's hands. Evie wasn't crying. She was smiling. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, just like the toys. Black syrup was flowing from the corners of her mouth. Mama Pig stood in the doorway. Her neck was wrapped in cellophane tape. She was shaking her head. The movements were sharp, jerky.
Quiet. Don't disturb them while they play.
Behind her, in the hallway, a pile of empty boxes was stacked. They moved. Soft whistling came from them. Peppa stepped back. She stepped on something soft. Dozens of plush Labubu lay on the floor. Their eyes gleamed in the dark. The air filled with a sound, a quiet children's laughter, and endless rustling of cellophane. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, the ominous song. This episode was never aired on TV. It all started when Peppa and George found an old music box in a chest in the attic. George accidentally wound it up, and a strange, unnatural melody began to play. The music was eerie, almost as if it shouldn't be heard at that moment. The music grew louder, and the air in the room turned cold and heavy. Suddenly, the walls began to ripple as though they were breathing. Shadows on the walls began to come alive, stretching into odd, twisted shapes that moved around the room. Peppa and George noticed their reflections in the mirror had become distorted. Their eyes were enormous, and their smiles twisted into something unnatural, like they weren't their own. "I can't take this anymore," whispered Peppa, grabbing George's hand. But when they tried to leave, the door was locked. The music grew louder, and the room began to fill with darkness. At that moment, Papa Pig rushed into the room, his face twisted in a strange smile. He saw the music box and said with surprise, "This is my old music box. I thought I lost it years ago." But his voice was different, deep and unnatural. "Papa, what's happening to you?" asked Peppa in fear. As soon as Papa Pig touched the box, his body began to distort. His face twisted, his eyes darkened, and his arms elongated unnaturally. "Now I can play again," he whispered, and his laugh, low and metallic, filled the room. Peppa and George watched in horror as Papa Pig lost all human form, his body collapsing into a shadow that couldn't stop moving. "I can't stop it," he said, and his figure faded into the darkness, swallowed by emptiness. The box started playing again. The music became unbearably loud, echoing through the room as if the room itself was alive. The walls cracked, and the shadows grew more menacing. Suddenly, Peppa and George felt something pulling them inside. They couldn't move, couldn't resist. "What's happening?" screamed George, but his voice was drowned by the music. At that moment, everything around them turned dark, and the room disappeared. Instead, they found themselves in an endless void, an abyss, where there was nothing but the sound of the music. Inside the box, everything was closed off, consuming them into its vast depths. Peppa and George stood in this nightmarish void, surrounded by dark shadows that wouldn't let them go. Their bodies grew heavier, and the music became more unbearable, as if it were a part of this endless darkness. "Are we stuck here forever?" whispered Peppa. And just as they tried to speak their last words, everything around them dissolved into the darkness, and the sound of the box merged with the silence. The music stopped, and the episode ended. Deleted Peppa Pig episode, The Spider. This Peppa Pig episode was never aired on television. It was removed. And now it's clear why. It all started like a normal day. George was playing on the carpet, Peppa was organizing her toys, and Daddy Pig was reading the newspaper. Mummy Pig was cooking breakfast. Everything felt calm, until George screamed. He said something had bitten him on his leg, 2 tiny puncture marks. No one paid much attention. A few hours later, George became sluggish. His face turned pale. He wasn't talking or eating. He just sat, breathing heavily. By evening, he stopped moving. That night, Peppa woke up to a strange noise. There was a rustling sound coming from the living room. George's bed was empty. Peppa went to look for him, and she found him. In the corner of the living room hung a web, huge like a tent, and inside it, George. He was stuck to the wall with webbing. His eyes were open, black, but he didn't move. His stomach was swollen. Something was moving inside. An hour later, Daddy Pig disappeared. Then Mummy Pig. Peppa was alone. The web was growing. It wrapped around furniture, walls, and the ceiling. The house was turning into a cocoon. She heard breathing. Behind her, she turned. The spider, huge, black, hairy, crawling along the walls. It moved toward George. One leg touched his stomach. The swelling cracked open. From inside crawled a small spider, spider-like, with a monstrous version of George's face. It twitched. Peppa ran to her room. The last thing she saw, her parents already hanging from the ceiling. Then she saw their faces, distorted and terrifying. Threads were pulling out of their mouths. This is a deleted episode of Peppa Pig. It was never aired on TV. The red eye. It starts like a normal day, but Peppa have just a dull pain. Peppa woke up and felt something pulsing in her left eye. Maybe I had a bad dream, she whispered to herself. But at breakfast, her eye started to itch and water. Mummy, my eye feels weird, said Peppa. Mummy Pig didn't even look. She just nodded. Don't touch it, it'll go away. But it didn't. By lunchtime, her eye was bright red, not just bloodshot. It looked unnatural. Peppa stared at herself in the mirror. She couldn't look away. That night, she woke up. The room was pitch black, but her eye glowed red, like a warning light. As she walked to the bathroom, the red light from her eye cast shadows on the walls. And then she saw them, faces, moving on the walls. You're the first, they whispered. The next morning, George's eye was red too. He just sat there, staring into nothing. When Peppa asked how he felt, he didn't reply. By noon, both of Mummy Pig's eyes were crimson. Daddy Pig wasn't speaking. His eyes were shut, but the skin around them turned purple. Peppa looked around the table. No one was blinking. No one moved. You're scaring me, she whispered. No one answered. That evening, Daddy Pig stood up. He walked to the mirror, and when he looked at his reflection, his face began to crack. His skin peeled off like rotten plaster. George started laughing, but the laugh turned into a rasping choke. His skin turned pale and blue, like someone who drowned. Mummy Pig collapsed. She didn't get up. From her eyes, thick black tears started to flow. Peppa ran into the nursery. She looked into the mirror. Now both of her eyes were red, but the worst part, her reflection moved before she did. She shut her eyes and heard whispering from all four corners of the room. Open them. You're not you anymore. When she opened them again, everything was red and black. The colors were gone. The walls were rotten. The floor was alive, and her family stood before her, dead, with glowing crimson eyes. Turn off the computer, they whispered. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, The Evil Force. An ordinary day, Peppa decided to draw, starting with a simple apple. But something went wrong, and the apple simply dissolved into reality. Peppa couldn't believe her eyes. Her desire to test her new power led to the next step. Each new drawing disappeared from her world. Soon, Peppa realized her power knew no bounds. She left home in the name of experimentation and set a new goal: the school. Every stroke of her marker became a new threat. The school began to vanish from reality. The facade flickered and dissolved away. Peppa looked at the empty field. She felt like a god in a world of ink, but someone was watching her, always watching. Peppa sensed that something was wrong and decided to return, but what she saw shocked her, freezing her with fear. The room seemed empty, but that was a lie. Sitting before her was her doppelganger, drawing something. With each stroke, he recreated her appearance, frightening and alien. Peppa froze in horror, realizing her power had gained its own will. The doppelganger looked at her with hollow eyes as she slowly dissolved into the space, unable to save herself.